Alright, so we'll get started right into it. I'm making this video on what sort of riding mowers or mowers that you should buy if you are looking to, well, go buy one if you're a homeowner, or if you're sort of like me where you mow yards for other people just to make a little extra cash on the side, or maybe if you're considering being doing it as a full-time job. And so basically, when you're getting first started, you obviously need to know, well, what size of mower you should get. And Home Depot's, website is a pretty good general place to start if you're looking for what size. So what they'll tell you, especially on their riding mowers, since those can come in a lot more sizes than just a plain old push mower. In my opinion, on average, yeah, if you got a half-acre lawn to, about 2 acres or so, generally a 42-inch and 46-inch deck is going to be your most common sizes, so I would get one of those. Or if you have a gate that's limited by what size, then get like a 30-inch deck one. And generally, if you got more than 2 acres, I'd say about 2 to 5 acres. Yeah, it's a little bit. If you got more than like 4 acres, then it's going to take more than a day to do it. In my opinion, you're just going to be mowing for so long. It's going to, if you're burning yourself out mowing because you're mowing for like several hours, then, you looking to get in a bigger mower, or, take your time with it and do certain sections on different days. And generally, anything bigger than 54-inch deck is going to cost you 3 arms and 3 legs, and you're going to obviously probably have to have more than 4 acres. So that's just sort of how you shop for what size of deck. And there are 2 kinds of decks that are more common, more or less, and typically they're going to be a stamped deck or a forged deck. Well, they've got millions of names for them. They're essentially, the same thing, whereas a stamped deck is going to be stamped out of a piece of sheet metal, basically, and a forged deck is going to be cut out of a piece of metal, welded, and, it's just generally a little bit more durable process, rather than just, a stamp comes by and presses out a piece of sheet metal to make your deck. So generally, a forged deck is always a nice touch. Now, a terrible forged deck is going to be way worse than a higher quality stamped deck. So keep that in mind, but generally forged decks are better. And one other thing to consider is, maybe you don't have a Home Depot or a Lowe's or a Menards or whatever box store brand you have. So, obviously you're going to have to shop at whatever you have available. And usually I prefer just to fix, junk ones, and since that's pretty easy, I just stick with that because I can get it for a lot cheaper than these things are brand new. And obviously, you got to consider, can you get parts for the thing? If you can't get parts for it and it breaks down, then what's the point in getting it? And another thing to consider is the inverse of that. If it doesn't ever break down, then it doesn't need parts. So, what's the point of it breaks down all the time and you can get parts for it if you could get a machine that doesn't break down? You got to consider both sides of the story, kind of thing. And they'll obviously have, attachments, but you should really get a bigger tractor if you want to do anything fancy with your riding mower. And they'll have, a delivery and a protection plan if you buy new, but it's a riding mower. I'm pretty cheap. I'm really cheap compared to a lot of people, but if you want that brand new flavor, you can go ahead and get that brand new flavor. And so obviously you're going to have to decide between, the 3 different kinds. You've got a rear engine rider, which I'm not too big a fan of, and it's not really my style. I do have a few. I really don't have many complaints about any of them, but I also rarely ever see people actually have these. So, I can't really vouch for many models of them. The old yard bug ones, though, those ones, I owned one of those for a while. It was a real cute little thing, and never really had any problems with it. So they're not bad. These things are not that easy to work on if you got to do decks, pulleys, belts, or whatever. And sometimes the blades are oddball sizes. So generally, I say just stick to a lawn tractor 42-inch deck, because that's just the plain Jane, most common size you'll ever see. And if you're going to get a zero-turn mower, you got to understand these things are going to be 2 to 3 times the cost of an equivalent lawn tractor. So, and you're paying for 2 transmissions, you're paying for 2 hydrostatic controls, you're paying for it's a whole different style. So you got to understand where the cost comes from and how it's justified. Now, in my opinion, a lot of these newer ones, they charge way too much for how much of a piece of junk some of them are, but, the cost is there because it makes sense. And so I guess we'll sort of break it down into, what most people are probably going to be looking at is going to be lawn tractors. And in general, there's only really going to be 3 or so brands. You're going to have MTD, which makes Cub Cadet, Boland's, Troy-Bilt. There's so many names under MTD, but generally if it ain't Toro or Honda, then it's probably MTD made. Now, I know what you're saying. Oh, but John Deere, they say it's made in the U.S. It's John Deere. Look, it's a badge right there. There's no made in MTD on them. Well, here's the problem. Yes, the body is made by John Deere in Tennessee. Yes, the seat is made by John Deere in Tennessee. Yes, the hood is made by John Deere in Tennessee. Yes, that steering wheel is made by John Deere. Actually, I don't really know. But the important part is that the transmission is a complete pile of garbage when they sell out the engine and the transmission. It's not made by John Deere. Yes, some percentage of it or whatever matches made by John Deere, so they can say made by John Deere in the US, but the most important part of a tractor is going to be your engine and your transmission. And generally on your lawn tractor, if you're just using it to mow, as long as it's got a metal transmission, then you should be good to go. The problem is on these, they use that HG 220 or something. I don't know. It's an HG model of a hydrostatic trans. You'll know it's hydrostatic because it's got these 2 foot pedals. And the thing on those is that the seals just fall out of them and they lose all of their oil and they just blow up. And I mean, I'm talking like 30, 40, 50 hours on these machines. They do not last. Those plastic transmissions are complete junk. So you really have to get the metal transmission. And I think they're usually a K46 tough torque. And a lot of people really don't like them. But in my opinion that I've seen, as long as you are not mowing up crazy slopes, mowing crazy stuff, if you're just mowing grass, nice, easy going, you just need it because you got a lot of grass, then your K46 will be just fine. So you'll see that metal on the back. It's, well, aluminum housing. And on those, they're not serviceable, but you can install fill and drain plugs. So if you're a handyman, then, anyone can do it as long as you got the tools for it and the time. But, I'd say go for it, It's really not too bad. And then the problem with Briggs, John Deere, is like almost all of their lower models. So I bet you money if we just go in here, is they almost always come with a super crappy Briggs & Stratton engine. So, as you can see, Home Depot sells Troy-Bilt, Cub Cadet, and John Deere mostly. And don't ever buy anything from Troy-Bilt ever. It's MTD, but it's Cub Cadet even cheaper, basically. So, yeah, there's like the Super Bronco and a couple of other Troy-Bilt classic models, but just generally stay away. If you love Troy-Bilt, then get that Super Bronco, because I think on those they have a much better transmission and engine. But generally, if you see a Briggs & Stratton engine in your Troy-Bilt, it's probably going to be a piece of junk. And so, as you can see, let's see, this is the base model John Deere. So, I don't know if they'll have a picture of it. So, you'll notice that what they do, I wish they had a better picture of it. Yes they do. You'll notice this suspiciously looks a lot like the same Briggs & Stratton 17.5 horsepower engine. And what they do, if it'll focus, now their image is kind of crappy though, but basically all it says is, well, the engine's made by John Deere because it has the cast iron sleeve, extended life series, oil filter, so it comes with an oil filter instead on that side, and it'll have like a bigger air filter or whatever, different design air filter. They make up a whole bunch of marketing jumbo just so that way they can say it's made by John Deere when it's really a Briggs and Stratton engine. And you'll notice, like, typically on the exhaust, different parts of the machine, you'll notice the Briggs and Stratton emblem on it anyway, so, you know, they didn't really hide it too well. And so you'll notice on our S100 model here, it has a metal transmission. On some models, they have a plastic transmission. You're going to want to look, you know, here, basically just anything behind this hitch plate. You want to make sure it's got a metal transmission because then it's a K46 tough torque more often than not. And it's a lot better of a transmission than any of the other ones. And so what you can see here when I was talking earlier about stamped versus forged, this is a stamped deck because you can see it's got nice and smooth edges and it rolls real pretty and it looks nice and whatever. That's all it does. It looks nice. That's it. So generally they just rust out earlier. Generally, you got to take care of them. Use your deck wash ports. Sort of the issue with the deck wash ports is if you forget to do it one time, then that grass is going to sit under there and it's going to rust out your deck no matter how many times. You got to do it every time or you might as well not do it at all, basically. And yes, those do work. Quite a few people have done videos on them. They do work. I promise you, they'll make your deck last way longer if you take care of them. And, you know, you can spray fluid film or any undercoating or repaint it, whatever. But really, I don't find that that's too necessary as long as you take care of your machine. You know, it's an investment. This is a very expensive investment for such a crappy engine. So, yeah, generally, if you take care of your stuff, it'll just take care of you. It makes it last longer, you know. And so obviously, well, what about the Cub Cadets, you know? And they have their XT1, XT2, and 3, and they charge $1 bajillion for XT3, so that's something you're probably not going to be looking at. I guess I'll show you. Let's see, we'll go onto that model. Let's see if they have that base model, Cub Cadet. I think it does have a plastic trans in it. We'll see. Nope, they've actually upgraded it. So yeah, that's fine. So yeah, anything with this metal transmission, more often than not, it's going to be a K46 tough torque. And they're okay. They're okay transmissions, so don't worry too much. And as you can see, it's got the nice smooth edge, so that's a stamped deck. And so generally what you're going to want to look for is not so much that it's a stamped or a forged deck, so much as it's got a deck wash port or some way to clean it out. Because if you don't clean it, that deck's going to rust out in like a couple of years. And so the other style of transmission, which you should absolutely run away and hide from because they're just awful. They can't hold up to anything, is these ones right here. On pretty much generically all MTDs that are on the lower end, they're going to have this forward neutral reverse transmission. It's going to have, it uses 2 belts to drive, and what'll happen is the spring will wear out or the plunger will wear out on the transmission. So then when you're actually moving it, it doesn't pull it out enough in order to shift. So, and usually like the spring will break that's just right up above this tire. And, you know, it's just, you know, why should I have to mess with this transmission, you know, a few years later? You know, it's, in my opinion, every single product that comes with an engine or a transmission or a motor of any kind should come with a 10-year bumper-to-bumper warranty. It should last way longer. And in my opinion, these tires are kind of crappy, but I don't really care what condition the tire is. You just add tire slime, and it'll fix your tires. I don't really care to spend money for tubes or new tires. Every single mower I fix, I just put slime in it. Works just fine. These tires, it doesn't matter if they're brand new or completely bald, they're going to give you about the same traction. But they'll save, you know, your grass from getting torn up. So trade-offs are all over the place with these things. And obviously you'll see the problem with these new ones. You know, they got this stupid key switch that has an extra button. You have to push the button in order to mow in reverse. Um, it's not necessarily unreliable so much as it's just a pain to deal with. But, you know, that's something to consider, you know. How often are you actually going to have to back up in order to mow? You know, if you don't have any fences on your property or corners, then you're probably not going to have to back up in order to mow, so maybe it won't be too much of a deal for you. And I do actually like the shift on the go with these. So there is some positives to these transmissions because you have full speed in reverse and forward, the same forward as backwards. So that's a nice touch to them, I guess you could say, but it doesn't justify how much of a piece of junk they are in general. And so that's sort of what you're going to want to look for when you're buying a riding mower. And obviously they're all going to come with, you know, the same sort of setup with the seat. You know, really, it's just going to be 2 springs, and that's all your suspension is. It's a riding mower. It's not made for speed or comfort. It's made to just mow, and that's pretty much about it. And so generally, there's going to be really only 3 engines you're ever going to see. There is a 4th engine from made by Toro, but that's a little less common. And generally what you're going to see is a Briggs & Stratton engine in just about every single one of these mowers. And it's just the most common engine because it's the cheapest engine. And we always call them brakes and scrap them, you know, Briggs and scrap iron, you know, it's for obvious reasons. The other engines you're going to see on new ones is going to be a Kohler 5400 series and a Kohler 7000 series. Both of these are pretty solid engines in my opinion, no real issues with them. Same with those Toro brand made engines, but those are really only ever on Toro mowers, so you're not going to really see too many of those. Absolutely no problems with either of those engines. And then you're going to get into Kawasaki engines, which is generally just the best engine you can buy. There really isn't any other engines that I would compare to them. They're just straight up better, no doubt about it. Anything with a Kawasaki I would totally buy. And this is just new that we're talking about. I don't really have any problem with any of the older Kawasaki's and whatnot. So that's just generally what I stick to. And we'll go ahead and go over the other engines from, you know, the same companies roughly. So the only engine from Kohler that I do not like are the Kohler Courages. The V-twins are much better than the singles, but the singles are just plain awful. I can go over all the issues with them for days, man. They're just terrible. So these valve covers, they leak all the time. It's a bucket style engine, so you see that oil filter is way up at the top because the whole bottom of the engine is sealed rather than having a sump. No problems with that design other than on this particular one, they like didn't Loctite or whatever the top bolts that hold the 2 parts of the engine together. So what'll happen is as they loosen up, they shear off on the flywheel, and then eventually the top of your engine comes flying off, basically, so that's pretty cool. Usually you'll catch it before it happens, and you'll have to junk it or whatever. But yeah, that's sort of Kohler's, you know, we didn't make that engine kind of thing. And with the Courages, generally like the starters on them will go bad, ignition coils. They go bad earlier than expected, basically. You know, you replace them once and then it's fine from then on. Not really any other issues notable with these ones. They're pretty solid engines. And there is the Kohler Command lineup, which is amazing in my opinion. There's no complaints about any of those. The only thing you got to stay away from on all Kohler engines is the little itty-bitty black box module. I think it's called an MDI module, CDI module. I think, yeah, just MDI. And basically what this does is it's a computer-controlled electric ignition. If you see that black box anywhere on that engine, it's going to fail at some point, and they're a pain in the butt. They make conversion kits, as you can see, tons of them, and if you got one, then I would suggest converting it over. Obviously, it's not going to be super cheap, but it'll make that engine way better. I guarantee it. It'll be absolutely worth your time and money. And that's across Command, Courage, and the newer 7000 series. Obviously, the newer ones, they don't really have any issues, but eventually those MDI modules are going to fail. Just stick with the plain and simple stuff. Don't get fancy with it. Keep it simple. And obviously, if you're buying a riding mower, then and you see that and you're like, well, I don't really want to mess with that. You can just pass on it. It doesn't matter too much. And now we'll get into the Briggs & Stratton IC engines. So before there was Briggs & Stratton Intech, which is all of their newer models in general, all of these smooth ones, there was Briggs IC Industrial, Commercial, and Impact, Karam, whatever name you want to come up with, but they were just all way better. So basically, on the newer Intechs, they switched over from a flathead and they went to a overhead valve. Now, some of these smooth head ones are still the ICs and overhead valves, which are still good engines. And, they'll look like that usually. And they're still good engines. But the problem with Intechs is they have plastic camshafts. And, well, you already can tell why that's a terrible idea. What's next? A plastic crankshaft, They're just, basically, if the engine's not running perfectly fine, it's blown up and it's detonated and it needs to be completely rebuilt. So, and the same problem with being on the plastic camshaft is on your crankshaft. They have maybe it isn't on the crankshaft, I can't remember. They have the compression release, and if that fails, throw the engine away pretty much, brakes and scrap them. So just scrap the engine because it's basically junk. It's not too bad to replace either of those parts, but it's actually getting OEM ones from Briggs & Stratton in some form of timely manner that's never going to happen. So it's just not worth fighting with them over it. And so generally, if you got these older ICs and some of these smooth head ones are OHVs, overhead valves, those are good engines. Not really any complaints about them. I can always get them running. Really, the only problem is when people don't take care of them. And that's across any engine anyway. If you don't take care of it, it's going to fail. The carburetor is usually the culprit on them because, you leave junk gas in it all the time. And that's it for like the singles. And the same case with the V-twin Intechs. Same problems, But the main problem actually on the Intechs, well, any engine, is, especially on the Intech, is if you get a bunch of junk built up over that cylinder head underneath this cover, and it's only like 6 bolts to take off this cover plus, air filter, and there'll be like a mouse nest under there or any amount of junk under there. What'll happen is it'll heat up real bad under there, and then your valve guide will walk out, and then you throw something. You're gonna, your valves are gonna start smacking the piston as it comes up or whatever, or generally it just bends the push rods, and then your engine doesn't runs terribly, pops, backfires, burns oil, you name it, any number of problems. And it's every single time you pop that valve cover off and you hear that, it's just always bent push rods usually. And most of the time you're going to have to get in there and reseat those valve guides, or if the guy, it's just a nightmare. Yeah, they're just terrible engines. Great for me who repairs them and, knows how to fix them and has done hundreds of them, but, not good for you homeowners who just want a mower that frickin' mows, is it too much to ask for? Yeah. Those are the first sets of Intechs that ever came out. The slightly smooth heads with OHVs. So same issue, plastic camshaft, and you'll notice you'll notice usually it's the intake or exhaust, it's the exhaust side valve, or exhaust side valve doesn't move because the push rod's not moving because your camshaft is completely destroyed. So yeah, generally stay away from Intex. They're pretty easy to fix. They're pretty simple to fix, but they're just terribly made, basically. And there is one other brand of engine that's been out of business for over a decade, and that would be Tecumseh. And they're a pretty rare bird. They're pretty good engines overall, but they went to like plastic carburetors that, you know, they started going down the rabbit hole of, okay, well, we're going bankrupt, so let's make everything cheaper, and that'll magically fix all of our problems. And yeah, it did not work. And so then when you get really old with Briggs and Stratton, you can get to an opposed twin rather than a V-twin. And now there's older Kohler Magnum engines that are pretty similar to these ones. And those are also really good, but I think I've only seen a couple of them ever, actually. And these things, they're pretty common. They are stupid indestructible. They are very high quality engines. Not really any problems besides the fact that they're so old at this point that, you know, they're gonna need some serious work just because they're almost 2-3 decades old by this point. And there is, of course, the Vanguard lineup of Briggs and Stratton engines that's way better than Intech. And, you know, they make generally horizontal shaft V-twins. And I like Vanguards way more. Vanguards are way better. And they do make Vanguard V-twins that are vertical shafts. And those are also really good engines, but you don't really see those on riding mowers too much. And so that's basically all the engines that you're ever really going to see on your riding mowers. I think that's pretty well covered on riding mowers, so we'll go ahead and move on to just push mowers. And so the problem with these new push mowers is they're terrible. Just plain and simple, you're paying $300 for something that is a brakes and scrap them. If you buy those ones off of Amazon, then, you know, props for you if the thing even works out of the box, because oh my goodness, those Power Smarts, Yard Max, whatever, you name them, they're just terrible. They're just junk. You can't even, I don't even know why you'd even try buying with them. I wouldn't mess with them. And so a problem with push mowers is the same problem with riding mowers. Generally, they're all MTD. Yard Machines, Troy-Bilt, you name it. Almost every brand is just Yard Machine, is MTD. Besides Toro, Honda. Yeah, that's it, Toro and Honda. Those are the only ones that aren't owned by MTD at this point. Because, yep, yeah, that's it, so yeah. So generally, whether it matters if it's a Troy-Bilt, a Yard Machines, a Boland's, a Murray, a Snapper, whatever, they're all the same pile of junk. A Poulon Pro, you name it, they're just all the same junk. And if you look, you know, you'll see they are all suspiciously similar in shape, color, design, you name it. And so I guess we'll start going over those problems with them and which ones you should avoid. Generally, if you're buying a lawn mower, a push mower, I would stick with Toro or Honda if you want it to last, but you can always get these ones just on the curb for free. So if it's cheap and you get it for free, then, you know, you might as well get it. So the problem with Honda is you're paying for that wonderful name on the side there of Japanese engineering, and that's it. You're paying for the engineer, the Honda name. These neck sight decks, they're fine. They're fine. They don't blow you out the water, and they're not amazing new innovations or anything, but, you know, it's a deck. It's a mower. It's supposed to mow. How much more do you need? And honestly, on these new ones with these weirder engines, not really any complaints, albeit they don't seem to last if you try and use them commercially. The older Honda engines are much more industrial. And honestly, I have no idea why there's like 50 models of Honda mowers. They're basically all the same besides the commercial mowers. And yeah. And I mean, I've had people with these mowers 20 years old and they have never changed the oil and they still work and run. I mean, these things are the name's already proven itself hundreds of times over. In my opinion, I prefer to get as simple and plain of a Honda as possible because it's the same exact mower all the way up to the commercial ones. So what's the point of paying almost $1,000 for the same $300 mower, basically? And obviously, Honda's going to say, well, there's this model includes a different color of wheel, basically, or whatever. They sweet talk you with whatever. They're basically the exact same mower. And so, let's see. And there's, of course, battery and corded. Stay away from corded. There's no point. Don't ever buy them. They're all junk. It doesn't matter what you buy. It's all these corded ones are just terrible. And as far as battery mowers go, if you got an itty bitty yard, I mean like quarter acre and under, then generally a battery powered mower is going to work for you. And almost all the brands, they use the same motors anyway. Whether you get, Ryobi and Greenworks, all those are going to be about the same motors, electric motors. And really, honestly, with those, I haven't noticed any particular brand that's 100% better than the other. I just really like the Ego brands. The Ego and the DeWalt and Makita and Milwaukee, all those mowers are a little bit better than the rest, in my opinion. But, it's kind of stupid expensive for those when I can just go out to the curb, pick me up one of these for for free, throw a new plastic carb on it, and it's good to go. $20 later, and I have a working lawnmower. So, pick your poison, sort of, whatever. It doesn't matter. As long as it mows, that's what you're buying a lawnmower for. It doesn't have to be fancy, it's just gotta mow. And so generically, this is like the most common mower you're gonna see, fix, repair, on the street, you name it, in the dumpster, wherever. I don't really have any real problems with these, except for the fact that they somehow let the design slide through of having that plastic knob there, and you see that little nut insert right there. It is the only thing preventing your handlebars, if we zoom back out, it's the only thing that prevents your entire handlebars from sliding into your deck. And guess when that's going to happen? When it's vibrating and shaking that nut loose. So if you own one of these, and you know somebody who owns with these, please tell them to make sure that that nut and this little wing nut here is tight and secure, because it is really unsafe and your lawnmower is going to detonate and break and bend the crankshaft, shear the key on the flywheel, you name it, millions of problems. It's a terrible design. But if you know about it, then, it's not so bad. But, I can't even tell you how many of these I got just because, handlebars are chewed up and I'll just weld a piece or throw a new piece of pipe in or whatever. There's really not many problems with these engines besides people not taking care of them. And generally, the plastic carb on these, it can't hold up to that E85 whatsoever. You gotta put some stabilized stuff or some ethanol-free. These poor plastic carbs, you look at them funny with that ethanol, and they're done. They're toast. And yeah, you can clean them out. I've cleaned maybe even 1,000 of these things, and they do clean up pretty nice. But I'd say probably 2 out of 10 times, 3 out of 10 times, I'm just replacing the carb because it's like $20 for an OEM one that's brand new. Replace it, you're good to go. Really don't have any other issues with these engines. I mean, they're pretty cheap. If you do the maintenance to them, they'll last a pretty good while. I just don't really have any other complaints about these. You really don't have to spend a whole lot of money to get a decent mower, but you got to take care of it. If you don't take care of it, it doesn't matter what engine you have, unless it's like an ancient Honda, it's gonna die. There's nothing you can do. And so we're going to go to sort of my favorite style of push mower engine. And yeah, I know I'm a bit of a Honda fanboy too, but... So generally, this older style of Briggs & Stratton engine is the best push mower engine. Well, for cheap. It's common, there's millions of them, and you don't have to pay for a Honda price. And yeah, you can get those MTD ones with Honda engines on them, which I certainly recommend. It's a pretty nice way to get a Honda for a lot cheaper. Same with the Toro. You know, just get a Honda engine on it, or the Toro engine also is really good. And you know, it's good to go. I really like the Toro ones with the rear wheel drive because they're a fairly simple rear wheel drive to work on. The Honda ones can be kind of a pain, but the Honda ones don't really ever break. So, you know, pick your poison, I guess. Generally, I'd say stick to a front wheel drive mower if you're going to get a self-propelled one. You know, push mower works just fine. Build up those muscles. And so on these older Quantum engines, their only downside is that they're old. And that's about it. Pretty common on these. People will leave them out with fuel over the winter, and the bowl will get clogged up or whatever. And then you just got to take the little you get a 1/2 inch wrench, take out that nut on the bottom of the bowl there, take a piece of like twist tie or whatever, and just clean it out. Or compressed air works really good too. And just clean it out, stick it back in. Generally, it's good to go. And funny thing, if you buy the Honda mowers, don't pay for those Honda air filters. They're like $15, $20. The Briggs & Stratton ones are the exact same thing, identical size to the Quantum engines. These same square ones, they're all the same size. Don't pay for the Honda ones. Just get the same Briggs one for like $5. It's way cheaper. And what'll happen, what's starting to happen and pretty more common, is the auto choke system on these will fail. And that's just because the mower's like 2 decades old, 3 decades old, you name it. But, you know, I replaced them and I haven't had one come back for them yet. So these Quantum engines, they're stout. Sort of kind of complaint is, you know, when you have to rewind the coil on these, pretty sharp. So be careful if you're rewinding your pull cord on these. They're pretty sharp. And what I'll see on these really old ones, the tanks, they'll crack. But that's just because of age and sitting out in the sun. If you take care of these Quantum engines, they are amazing. They will last. There's no real complaints about them whatsoever. But once again, you got to take care of it. And so we'll go to the itty bitty little baby engines. The older style. 450, I think it's like EX. With the plastic diaphragms. You guys all know what I'm talking about, though. I'm sure you do. Yeah, these older engines right here are pretty. They're about as bare bones of an engine as it gets. Yeah, like this model here. And these are all basically identical. They'll have like 450, 350, 400, 5. It's the same engine. Doesn't matter. It's all about the exact same thing. And sort of what will happen on these is these are actually a lot more like your trimmer's carburetor or your little 2-stroke equipment carburetor than an actual carburetor off of a lot of these new ones. And so what you got to do is every few years you just got to replace the diaphragm that sits between the gas tank and your carburetor. And generally you've got a good mower. And there's hundreds of these. And you know, you just replace that diaphragm for like $3 or something. It's super cheap. It's absolutely worth picking these things up whenever you see them, unless there's a hole in the block from somebody not taking care of it. And same thing with these on those recoils. They're super sharp and they'll take you out, man. They will cut you up. You got to be careful with these ones. And yeah, air filter on these is super cheap and easy to replace. The fuel tank can sometimes get rusted out, once again, if you're not taking care of it. There's really no issues with these besides when people don't take care of them. That's really about 90% of problems if people don't take care of them. I can't complain about these little engines. They're on like a ton of itty-bitty push mowers. They're totally worth fixing and selling. And, I mean, as far as push mowers go, you really can't go wrong with them as long as you know what you're getting into. There's not really any complaints about them. And, you know, Tecumseh made a load of those smaller engines for them and whatnot. And Tecumseh engines, we'll pull some up so that way you can see what I'm talking about. They're pretty much all identical. Ooh. And you'll notice a lot of Tecumseh engines on like rototillers, little stuff. Those itty bitty engines, it's usually a Briggs or a Tecumseh engine. So you'll notice, oh yeah, that engine right there, hundreds of those, hundreds, tons of them. And you'll see like this engine all the time. Here's a good side view of them. So you notice they've got their intake and exhaust on the same side of the engine. That's pretty nice. And really the only thing these suffer from is being out of business for a decade and being old, very old, you know, obviously out of stock. Really no complaints with them at all. Absolutely solid and stout engine if you take care of it. Some people do like put these on like a bunch of go-karts, but what I find with them is when you get up to those higher speeds and whatnot, anything over like 25 miles an hour, generally you're gonna have to do like a carb upgrade or, you know, move to like a Predator engine or something. And those Harbor Freight engines, there's just a bajillion of them. They're pretty super simple and stupid, nothing fancy with them whatsoever. So not really any complaints with those Predator engines. Oh, snowblowers, yeah. Loads of snowblowers have this engine or some copy of it. Now, on new snowblowers, you'll notice there'll be these engines with no names, no labels, no nothing. Don't buy them. Stick with one that says Tecumseh, says Briggs & Stratton, or you know, is the Toro engine. Or, you know, if you don't recognize any of those names, you know, that I've said in this video, I would stay away from those engines because they're generally a clone and they're generally a lot cheaper. And a pretty rare bird is these little Kawasaki engines. These things are indestructible, man, but I've seen one or two in my life. And one other sort of cool engine I just mentioned just for kicks, basically, is the old Lawn Boy 2-strokes. You'll rarely run into a 2-stroke ever, but these things are pretty cool. You've probably seen millions of them online or whatever, but they're running out, and there's not so many of them. The things are indestructible. They're like 50, 60 years old, and they still work. It's impressive, really. But you're not going to see too many of these anymore. And so that's basically about it for, you know, lawnmowers. I say just go pick one up off the street and try and fix it yourself. You know, you can replace the spark plug, change the oil, change the air filter, and that'll fix like probably half the mowers out there on the street, to be honest. If not, it's probably a carb issue. So, you know, get out there and give it a go. You know, give it your best shot. You know, hit me with your best shot. You know, I'm sorry for all of you who just cringed at that. I can write an apology letter by hand if you'd like, but I can't make any promises about that. And so then there's obviously, you know, trimmers and other small outdoor power equipment. Generally with those, if you stay away from those MTD brands, Hyper Tough, Troy-Bilt, Craftsman, you name it, you'll be fine. It's going to be the repair market for those. It's not so valuable if you're going out to buy, you know, buying them to fix and sell so much as if you're just fixing it for other people, because the parts for them are pretty expensive compared to what you're getting, and generally people don't want to pay for them unless it's like a brand new one that looks really nice and is cleaned up really well. And generally, you know, the battery equipment, if you got less than, I say, if you're a half an acre and under, battery equipment, go with it. If you got the money for it, go with it, because you're not going to have to mess with oil. You're not going to have to mess with gas. You're not going to have to mess with spark plugs, air filters, and whatnot. But don't cheap out and get the Green Machine 62 volt, you know, American superpower. Wow. You know, sorry that was a little bit pointed towards a certain race of people, but it's true. So if that hurts your feelings, then I don't know, go sit in the corner or something, whatever. It don't matter. And really, that's going to basically cover everything. Sorry about that quick distraction. And one other thing to mention, no oil change. No, don't buy it. Don't buy it for 1 second. It's terrible. And yeah, intentionally burning oil is never a good thing because you're going to carbon up your valves and everything. It's a big mistake. Don't buy it. And what I like to do, honestly, for you know, outdoor power equipment and whatnot in general, is just go to Marketplace and find one that's cheap, does still work. You can get blowers, trimmers, edgers, you name it. You can get them way cheaper and still in working condition. As long as you take care of them, they'll generally last a while. I mean, I've fixed tons of those cheap piece of junk trimmers. And there are 4-cycle trimmers, which I like the Ryobi ones just to mess with them. I would not recommend using them or getting them, honestly. They're kind of unreliable, but they're a really cool piece of equipment in general. Generally, I always just recommend to everybody that I just get an SRM 225 from Echo. It's a great trimmer. It's just a great trimmer. There's no complaints with it. And so you'll notice on these ones. So Homelight used to be a great brand for trimmers. If you find any of these older style Homelights, these things are amazing, but they're pretty rare. And if I can find an older style, or yeah, well, that's a 4-stroke, but we'll see. I'll just go to the one I know for sure. The Walmart Hyper Tough gas trimmer. And all of them are going to generally look the same. And all of them are generally going to be a piece of junk. So if it'll zoom in here, and if they stop showing me 50 million ads, but generally all the ones that look like that are complete junk. They do not last. They're just terrible. And, oftentimes I've tried fixing them and messing with them and whatnot, and they're just a pain in the butt to work on. They're just terrible. I mean, you can mess with them, you can get them to work, you can get them to do stuff, but in general, I just stay away from these ones. And what'll happen is, like, on the ones that have, like, the quick change shafts for other attachments, is because the metal's just paper thin aluminum, it'll just bend over time, it'll break, and then the shaft won't work, and then you can't. They're a nightmare. And generally what I say is, if you're a homeowner, feel free to get those quick change ones that you can change out for multiple attachments. But if you're going to do it for anybody besides yourself, basically, it's not going to hold up. Just get a dedicated straight shaft trimmer, get a dedicated straight edger, dedicated hedge trimmer, because something that's dedicated to one job generally will do a great job at that one thing. But when you get a jack of all trades, master of none, it's not good at any one particular thing per se. And that's just generally how I prefer to get equipment, is just, if you're gonna be a homeowner and you want to start getting into, mowing for other people and whatnot, you get dedicated equipment rather than, getting like those multi-forces and stuff. Just stick with stuff that is great at what it already does. There's no need to go crazy. And sort of that will cover pretty much everything you need to know. As far as I'm pretty certain I've covered everything. Just ask me any question and I'll for sure be able to help you out as soon as I can, because I'm obviously very busy doing other stuff and getting ready to leave. But I'll try to help you out. And obviously, if you've read the descriptions on some other videos, I've said that sort of what I would like to do is be a loan shark, essentially. But I just want to be an interest free. You don't have to pay me back anything. I just want to help other people out, basically, because I've always wanted to start, like, I basically wanted to do what, like, Andrew Camarada does and whatnot, but unfortunately I am not that rich. I'm pretty well off and I've got a lot of good things going for me, but I forgot to purchase that born into a family in the 1980s and somehow have a great strong back and all that other good stuff to get going in the world. It's really hard to become a millionaire by like 28 these days. Not impossible, but it's really hard for every youngin these days to make their way in the world. And what I really recommend for all of you youngins out there who don't know if they want to go to college or trade school, or if they want to start their own business, or any millions of other options, is I always recommend to take a year break, a semester break, whatever. Just take a break from school right after you graduate. It really helped me out sort of decide what I would like to do. I'm probably just going to keep recording videos. Once I come back, I'll definitely probably do like diesel mechanics and whatnot, and just keep working, and hopefully one day I'll have enough views, subscribers or whatever, and sponsors that I'll be able to go and help other people out achieve their, lawn mowing business dream, or lawnscape team, or, property maintenance business, or I don't even know, if you want to raise bunnies, you name it, breed bunnies, sell bunnies, whatever you want to be. I would like to help people, achieve that. And obviously a loan shark is going to want some money back. And in my opinion, the best way to invest in the future is to sacrifice the present a bit, sacrifice your time now in order to improve the future. Sacrifice your money now to improve the future, rather than, saying, hey, I'll help you out now, but later on I'd like something back. And that's a way to do business. That's a business. Me, I'm just a fellow, American trying to help out other Americans. And, obviously I'd have to start small. I can't help everybody, but I hope there'd be a lot more people like me. Well, hope that there'd be a lot of other people with loads of excess cash, essentially. I consider basically anybody that makes over 100K rich, pretty much. So, that's what I'd like to do. If, I don't really know when would be a good point to get started going one by one. I'd like to, sort of record a video a week on helping somebody out, get their business started, go to them, preferably. I'll probably stick to, my state, and maybe this next state's over and whatnot or whatever. But I would absolutely love to be able to go with somebody, go fix up some equipment for them with them and show them what, how to get your hands dirty and stuff. Fix it up, bring it home, start your business, and get things going. Get some advertisements, and I'd love to have loads of connections on here, and, start sort of my own website. And I guarantee you, if I start my own website, there will be no ads, no pop-ups, no ad blockers, no nothing. If you guys make this happen, I guarantee you I'm going to make so many dreams come true. And I know it's like, one person a week, that's only 52 people out of the year, but hey, that's 52 more people that are doing what they'd actually love to be doing, rather than, zero. That's better than nothing. And I just, hopefully I'd love to be able to help as many people as possible, but, I'm one guy, and hopefully there's more people like me. But, everybody throw your money in the pot, just do your own part. I'd like to thank you guys for watching, and hopefully one day I make it. And I hope you all have a great weekend. Alrighty, signing off.